All right, hello, we are live. Okay, so first I'm going to talk about Fiveable really quickly. Make sure you follow them on social media, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. If you have an account on Crowdcast, you already get emails from us. But if you follow us on social media, you'll get even more information beyond that. And it's also really great to share with your friends who are struggling in AP courses like AP English Language, like today's stream is about. All right. So in today's stream, we're first going to start off with a review of the introduction paragraphs. We'll move into a review of the 141 rubric. Then we'll break down a paragraph, figure out how body paragraphs work. We'll do a practice body paragraph, and then we'll open it up to a Q&A. So this should last about 30, 40 minutes or so. And yeah, I'm super excited to work with y'all on this. So let's start off with the intro view. This is basically covering what Stephanie Kirk covered last week on Monday. And I just wanted to remind y'all, especially for those of you who are watching on replays, that we always have AP English language streams at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific, every single Monday. That's when our live streams are. So the basic elements of the argument essay include the claim, evidence, commentary, objections, and conclusion. So you've got to have all 5 of these pieces in order to score a 6, the highest possible score that you can get on the argument essay. In the course and exam description, they list multiple expectations, such as responding to prompt with a defensible thesis, explaining how your evidence supports the line of reasoning. And every single prompt will always have the sentence, which is usually the last sentence, write an essay that argues your position on. So in order to write an effective intro, remember to bat the prompt. So figure out the background, what are they advising you to do, the task, create a thesis, use the acronym REHUGO for evidence, which is actually going to get covered in the next slide. And in that 45 minutes or so that you're allotted, you should basically spend 6 minutes on reading the prompt, planning the essay, 7 minutes writing your intro, 20 minutes on the body paragraph, which is what we're going to focus on today, 5 minutes on the conclusion, and 2 minutes to proofread and revise. All right, so in terms of our types of evidence that we can use, and this is also important for the body paragraphs, remember REHUGO. So R for reading, E for entertainment and arts, H for historical, U for universal truths, G for government, O for observations and experiences. And those are all the different ways that you can use evidence to essentially strengthen your point and strengthen your thesis. Also, the function of the introduction really is to set the tone of the essay, introduce the topic of the essay, and state your position on the topic. And I really think that that ties into the whole point of today's stream, body paragraphs, because what we want to do is the body paragraphs are really the meat of the essay. Why your writer cares, why are they reading it, and the ways that you write the intro paragraph will really shape how you write your body paragraphs. So for your introduction, make sure that you have that thesis, so that defensible claim. You can do a bunch of different ways. You can use a creative opening, an anecdote, and then bridge into the thesis. Some people like to list their points. That's okay. And some people don't in the intro. All right, so for anyone who's in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments right now, or you can ask them in an Ask a Question tab, which is if you're on mobile, it's like the 3rd tab, I think, on your screen on the bottom on Crowdcast, or you can just ask it straight up in the chat. Okay, so let's review the AP Lang rubric, because I think this is really important, especially when you're coming up with free responses or free response essays. So remember that effective body paragraph should earn you 4, maybe 5 points out of those 6 points on the AP Lang scoring rubric. I say that first point, the thesis point, should always be in the introduction. The last 5 should typically be in your body paragraphs. Maybe one of them might come, maybe the sophistication point will come from the thesis, maybe not. So you can earn 4 points for evidence and commentary. And what College Board says is that you need to provide evidence that's relevant to the thesis. So you're not just providing evidence that's really broad that speaks to almost anything. It's very specific to your thesis. And you also give commentary based off of that evidence that explicitly and consistently explains the relationship between the evidence and the thesis. And that's not too difficult as long as you know what the evidence is and you're not making it up. It's very easy to link that evidence to your thesis and kind of explain that whole relationship. You can also earn 1 point for sophistication. There are two ways you can do it, I believe, for the thesis. The first way is like putting your thesis in a context, or like making your thesis include like other categories. I think that will earn you sophistication. But I think the easiest way to earn sophistication on the argument essay is just make an extra body paragraph that includes a concession, rebuttal, refutation. We're going to focus on that today, actually, in our body paragraph stream. Not only are we going to talk about our like regular old like meaty paragraphs where we're covering your evidence and commentary, we're also going to touch base on sophistication. You can also make effective rhetorical choices that strengthen the persuasiveness of the argument, or you could even use like a vivid, persuasive, convincing prose style that's appropriate for your argument. So so in today's stream, we're first going to talk about the evidence and commentary paragraph, and then we're going to segue into the sophistication point. So for an evidence and commentary paragraph, I took this example from College Board, edited a little bit due to copyright. So the first sentence of almost every single body paragraph for the argument essay is going to be very, very directly, it's going to be basically an answer to the prompt. So this one was about disobedience and whether it was necessary and the impacts of like, violating the law. So in this case, the first sentence, which I bolded, is the topic sentence. The earliest example of American disobedience is the Stamp Act Congress. And then the next few sentences are the evidence. The American people were furious with the British for enacting the Stamp Act. This was the first direct tax on the colonies after a period of solitary neglect. However, it was with disobedience that the British decided not to repeal the Stamp Act. So that's just giving historical context. That's the H and REHUGO. And then you conclude it with, otherwise, it would have set a precedent for the British to directly tax the colonies like the other mainland British people. This is commentary. That's not something that's like a historical fact. And then because they employed tactics of disobedience, they were able to achieve exactly what they wanted. This just links back to the thesis, and it shows like, I guess, the broader significance of why disobedience matters. So that's really what you want to answer in every single body paragraph. You want to answer what evidence you're providing. You want to answer why it's important and how it links back to your thesis. So this would earn about 3 to 4 points, because I'd say in terms of evidence and commentary, it does provide evidence that is relevant to the thesis. It includes some commentary that explains the relationship between the evidence and the thesis. I don't give this a full 4 points because I don't necessarily know if this is what College Board deems explicit commentary or like strong evidence, but I still think this is a good example in which you could write evidence and commentary. All right, so let's talk about sophistication. Some may argue that capitalism is not, this essay, by the way, was about capitalism and its benefits and flaws. And this person talked about how, this was last year's prompt. The essay was write about something that you find is overrated. And this person argued that capitalism was overrated. So their topic sentence for their sophistication paragraph was a concession. Some may argue that capitalism is not overrated because it is better than communism. Then they give their evidence. First of all, that's a false dichotomy that can be traced back to Cold War ideas that the only two systems are capitalism and communism. Second of all, while communism has killed millions of people, so has capitalism. So this is actually not only evidence, it's actually a rebuttal to that concession. And then they conclude it with a refutation. So while millions starve or die of treatable illnesses and injuries for economic reasons, it's hard to argue that capitalism is that much less bloody than communism. So do you see how they kind of concluded it and linked it back to the topic sentence? So I would say this earns the sophistication point, and so does College Board. They agree, because it does specifically satisfy that category of including a concession, rebuttal, or refutation. And honestly, what I used to do for my argument essays is I had an intro paragraph, I had 2 body points, and then I had that sophistication point or that rebuttal as my third body paragraph, and then my conclusion. So I think by having all 5 of those, like having that 5-paragraph essay will help you earn the most amount of points possible because you are providing sufficient evidence, very strong commentary, while also having that sophistication point at the very end before your conclusion. Okay, so now we're going to do a little bit of practice. So in today's prompt is going to be from 2006, from talk radio to television shows, from popular magazines to web blogs, ordinary citizens, political figures, and entertainers express their opinions on a wide range of topics. Are these opinions worthwhile? Does the expression of such opinions foster democratic values? Write an essay in which you take a position on the value of such public statements of opinion, supporting your view with appropriate evidence. So I see that there are new people joining in. Hello. We're working on the argument body paragraphs, as you can see from like the title, but right now we're working on practice. So we'll do that. So the first thing I want you to do is read that little chunk of text, our prompt today, and just write a thesis answering the prompt. I'll give about 2 minutes for you to do that. For those of you watching the replay sometime in the future after January 27th, you can just write this thesis down on a piece of paper and we'll compare and contrast later. So yeah, 2 minutes to write a thesis. And your thesis doesn't have to be very long. As long as it doesn't restate the prompt, you're good. Okay. I don't know if y'all are still writing. If you are, take your time. We'll go over it in just a bit. I just don't want to leave it. I don't want to delay it too long. So we'll move on to the next thing, which is write a 4-sentence paragraph with a topic sentence, evidence, and commentary relevant to your thesis. Oh, it just disappeared. There we go. So after writing your thesis, write a paragraph. And then this should really take only about 4 to 5 minutes or so, I'd say. Writing the thesis will probably take about like 4. Writing the thesis and reading the prompt will take about 7 minutes. And honestly, I think you can do it as quickly as 5. And then writing that paragraph shouldn't be too difficult as long as you can think of like a subpoint based off of your thesis. And so after writing a 4-sentence paragraph, write a paragraph of sophistication. So include like a concession, a rebuttal, or a refutation. So essentially what you want to do is you want to take your thesis, you want to find the opposing side, and then you want to concede, rebut, or refute. And I would honestly do a combination of all 3 because I think that's the best way you can prove that you are an effective writer, because as long as you concede and refute, you're good. All right, I'll hold it on this slide for about 2 minutes or so, and then we'll move on from there. I just don't want to rush y'all. All right, so now we're just going to go through my answers because I think it's important to also show a perspective from me instead of just like having y'all write it. So to answer the prompt, my thesis was public statements of opinion are worthwhile as they promote healthy discourse throughout society and can often lead to meaningful change. So the thing that answers the prompt and what gets me the thesis point are the first 6 words. Public statements of opinion are worthwhile. That answers the thesis because it says, write an essay in which you take a position on the value of such public statements of opinion. Because I take a position, public statements of opinion are worthwhile, I get the thesis point. It's important to note that you can't say something like, some people think public statements are good and some people think they're bad. Or saying public statements of opinion are both good and bad. Those are things you cannot do on the AP Lang argument essay because you're not taking a defensible position. You are trying to argue both sides. That's absolutely unacceptable. That's not something you should ever be doing. And so you should always just be taking one side or the other. And then I start introducing what's called the line of reasoning, which they're really emphasizing more this year in AP English. So the line of reasoning is that those like the next part of that sentence, as they promote healthy discourse throughout society and can often lead to meaningful change. So because I'm kind of introducing what I'm about to say in the rest of the paragraphs, those are like my 2 body points I had in mind: promoting healthy discourse, leading to change. I'm starting to introduce and preview that line of reasoning. And I think that's optional. I don't know. I think it wouldn't hurt. It probably shows some degree of sophistication as well by adding some context. All right, and so for my sample body paragraph, I wrote, public statements of opinion promote healthy discourse throughout society. For instance, Jimmy Kimmel's decision to talk about healthcare and pre-existing conditions on his late-night talk show likely changed the opinions of many Americans on the issue of affordable healthcare. Consequently, it could result in a change in public opinion for Americans. So my first sentence, public statements of opinion promote healthy discourse throughout society, that is my topic sentence. I'm kind of talking about my main argument. Then I move into my evidence and commentary, which in this case is Jimmy Kimmel's decision to talk about healthcare on his late night talk show. I would consider that pop culture evidence that you can cite. And then my last sentence is my last half of my second sentence, and the last sentence is commentary. It could result in change in public opinion. And that sort of links back to my thesis, because I'm actually kind of tying in both of the body points I outlined in the thesis in my example paragraph. I think that's something that's really important, because making sure that your essay flows is also something that could earn you the sophistication point, because you don't want it to read very, very awkwardly. Although you only have 45 minutes to write it, so if it's a little bit choppy, it's not that big of a deal. So if you have any questions about this paragraph, just leave them in the chat and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. All right, and my sophistication paragraph, very short, just 3 sentences. Some argue that public statements of opinion lead to polarization. Polarization, by the way, for those of y'all who don't know, are when you get very extreme in your opinion. So you go far to the left or far to the right, or far on one issue, far on one side of one issue, or far on one side of the other issue. Yet, free speech is important as it leads to both sides hearing contrasting opinions. So I think that's my rebuttal. That free speech is important, as public statements of opinion actually leads to you hearing the other side. This creation of a marketplace of ideas actually reduces polarization, and that's my refutation and my kind of conclusion sentence. So I'm saying that essentially, if you share your opinion, you're probably going to be less polarized because you're hearing what other people have to say. So that's my sophistication paragraph. All right. So now we're technically done with the body paragraphs portion of this stream. So I'm going to open up to questions. I'll basically open the stream maybe for 6 or 7 minutes or so to do a Q&A. You can ask me questions over any of these topics, over the argument essay, rhetorical analysis, synthesis, Fiveable as a whole, or the AP Lang team, or really anything related to English AP courses. I'd be happy to answer for the next 6 minutes or so. Otherwise, we'll just end the stream pretty quickly. Do you know any tips on how to write your thesis in a way that does not directly restate the prompt? That's a great question. So I'm actually going to go back on my slides. Okay. So this was our prompt. And honestly, the best way that you can write your thesis is to look at what they're asking you to do. And that means just read the last sentence. Write an essay in which you take a position on the value of such public statements of opinion. So College Board is very strict with their grading. They say, if you're restating the prompt, that's saying public statements of opinion have value. I think even then that's a little bit blurry. So I would even avoid using words almost exactly from the prompt. That's the first tip I'd have. So I would say something like public statements of opinion are problematic. Public statements of opinion lead to blah, 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 right? That's a way that you would avoid restating the prompt. And honestly, on the argument essay, they're a little bit more lenient, because as long as you take a position, as long as you say something one way or the other, public statements of opinion are good, public statements of opinion are bad. I think even then you would still get the point. But I think the whole restating prompt thing is more of an issue in rhetorical analysis, not even synthesis, where they give you questions where it's write an essay in which you analyze the rhetorical choices that Jones made in her speech, right? And so if you say something like Jones made rhetorical choices in her speech, that is restating the prompt. But saying something like Jones uses multiple literary techniques, including diction and syntax, in order to establish, in order to convince her audience to blah, 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 blah. So having an in order to statement on the rhetorical analysis essay is how I would say you can restate, how you can avoid restating the prompt, because you're talking about the author's purpose, you're talking about the author's audience, and you're mentioning their tone. I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, it's okay. You can ask follow-ups because it's pretty open. We're not doing much. During the writing portion, do you have to allot time for yourself, or do proctors give you time for each individual essay? That's a great question, Olivia. So what actually happens is you get 40, let me do this math real quick. You get 85 minutes, which is an hour. I think you get an hour and 30 minutes, actually, 90 minutes to write the 3 essays. I'm going to double check that because I want to misinform you. But what I was always taught in AP English is that you should, like, the proctors do not, all they tell you is your free response has started, and I think they give you a 10-minute warning. And that's what's really scary. And I'm sorry, by the way, it's 2 hours. So you get 2 hours to write 3 essays, and that's not too bad. That means you get about 40 minutes per essay or so, 120 minutes, right? Let me just confirm that. 2 hours and 15 minutes. I'm like misinforming you over and over. So this is how it's structured, right? You have the synthesis essay first, then you have the rhetorical analysis essay, then you have the argument essay. I don't know if you've covered synthesis yet, but it's an essay where you read some sources, and then you use those sources to kind of formulate an argument. So it's like the argument essay, but you're citing like source A, source B, C, D, E, F. It's very, very similar, by the way, to the DBQ that you might have done in WAP already, or AP World. And most juniors take AP Lang, so you have some degree of experience with citing sources. But you get 15 minutes to read the sources, and then you continue writing. So what happens is you basically have about 15 minutes to read the sources. They'll tell you 15, your reading time is up, and then from then on out, you're on your own. So you have, I would like basically keep looking at the clock, look at 40 minutes. When 40 minutes are up, you move on to the rhetorical analysis. And then usually what they do is, I think most proctors give a 10-minute left warning. But honestly, you should already be in your, like, you should be close to finishing your essay when they tell you 10 minutes remaining. Because last year what happened is I remember a lot of my friends and like people in my room basically were still writing their second essay where they called 10 minutes left, and they had 10 minutes to write the argument essay. That's like a no-go. That's how you do not do well on AP English, if you have 10 minutes left for one essay. Does that make sense, Olivia? Sorry for like being a little confusing earlier. So 2 hours and 15 minutes. You have 15 minutes for synthesis, source reading, then it's 40, 40, 40. All they tell you is when 10 minutes are left. All right, great. Okay, thank you. Also, since there is a time constraint, do you think it may be better to combine evidence and commentary as much as possible in large sentences, or write multiple sentences in order to be more clear and less choppy? That's a good question. I think it depends on your style of writing, if that makes sense. So like, I write very, very like rigidly. So I write like, I always do 1 sentence of evidence, 2 sentences of commentary. That's like, there's no formula for the argument essay. People write it in different ways. People score high in different ways. Some people have like 5 body paragraphs. Some have 1. So it just depends on your way of writing. I think as long as you have that evidence and you link that evidence to the thesis, it doesn't matter if it's a bunch of sentences or like 3 sentences, as long as you really touch base. I just think like if you're combining it into large sentences, it gets very easy. Like occasionally what will happen is, what I've noticed, at least from reading argument essays, because I did do a lot of peer reviewing back when I was a student, and like reading my friends' essays and stuff, or my classmates' essays, what tends to happen is that you write a bunch of evidence because, like, evidence off the top of your head, like the topic about write about something that's overrated, right? I was in AP US history, so I talked about how politics was overrated because it doesn't lead to like actual change. It gets very easy to just like talk about the details of your evidence and not link to commentary. So in my opinion, if you write multiple sentences, it makes it easier in your head to remember, oh, I need to write more commentary than evidence, because that's what the readers are looking for. So honestly, yeah, there is a time constraint, and writing multiple sentences versus writing just like large sentences, that's honestly your preference. Hope that makes sense. And we'll keep the questions rolling because the stream is technically not supposed to end until 8 Eastern. But usually our streams for English are about 30 to 40 minutes long or so, in that range, because we don't want to hold you for too long. And honestly, there's not that much to say unless we're like reviewing for multiple choice and stuff like that. Is there any way you can clarify ways you can get the sophistication point? That's a great question. So I'm going to, I wrote this article for Fiveable a long time ago, and I'm actually going to paste it right in here. And I'll like go over it speaking wise, but for reference, you can look at it for reference. So I'm going to paste it right here. So the ways that College Board deems that you can get the point, and I'll just actually flip on over to that page. So let me do that. Tab. Okay. Oh, hello. That's not what I wanted. Hello. I see that I think Mia joined. Welcome. We're just doing like a Q&A right now about argument essay, anything Fiveable related, anything AP English related. And right now we're just answering questions. That's all. So if you have any questions for me, Mia, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay. Now the screen is sharing, I think. It's working. Does it show up as a black screen? I think it does. Okay, that's weird. There we go. I wrote this article a long time ago. It was like June. But so specifically for the argument essay, you can do one of these 6 things. The first is creating, this is the part. Creating a thesis that requires nuanced consideration of text evidence. I don't think the AP readers have really been specific on what that means. I think if your thesis talks about maybe some of the evidence you're going to introduce, you might get that point. I just think it's pretty difficult. And similarly, I think this last one, using a vivid, persuasive, or convincing prose style, I think that's very hard in 40 minutes to be very vivid and persuasive, especially in your argument essay, because it will end up maybe sounding a bit choppy. Honestly, I think, and same thing for like making effective rhetorical choices that strengthen the persuasiveness. I think this category right here, including a concession, rebuttal, refutation, that is the easiest way, Nina, to get your sophistication point, because almost every AP English teacher I've ever encountered highly encourages you do this concession and rebuttal thing as a separate body paragraph, because it makes it very easy for you to get sophistication. I think you can also, to some extent, situate your thesis in a broader context. So as you may have learned in other AP subjects, you can do that thing called contextualization, where you put your entire thesis and your argument in a context, I guess. So that's another option. And you can, yeah. So does that make sense, Nina? There are technically 6 ways, but I encourage people to really pursue these 2 for argument, because these other 3 are a little bit more subjective, and it's a lot harder to pinpoint how to do them. And if you, by the way, scroll up on the article, there are actually different ways to get sophistication in different subjects. So for instance, in rhetorical analysis, you can get sophistication by recognizing and accounting for contradictions or complexities within the text. And in synthesis, I think they have the same points as argument. I hope that makes sense. All right. I'd be happy to answer a few more questions from y'all over anything, English, language, AP subject, really anything. In addition, not about the argument essay, are you able to compare and contrast a synthesis essay to a history-based DBQ? It's a great question. And actually in 2 weeks, I don't know if I'm hosting it yet, but it's going to be between Kevin, Steinhauser, Stephanie Kirk, or myself. One of the three of us may be streaming about the synthesis essay, so you'll get more of an in-depth overview, but I can kind of compare and contrast. So how the synthesis essay works. Here, I'm going to load up something. Okay. So what you'll get on the day of the AP exam is this packet. And this packet has some information, and specifically you'll get something that looks like this. So they will give you a thesis. So this second paragraph is what matters the most. Synthesize material from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-written essay in which you develop your position on the most important factors that an individual should consider when deciding whether to establish a wind farm. So the difference, the first major difference between the DBQ and the AP Lang synthesis essay is that like hippie, whatever you called it, like historical context, intended audience, point of view, purpose, you do not need to do that for English. You do not need to put the evidence in a context. All you have to do is cite it. So honestly, I think the synthesis essay is almost like a research paper, if you've ever done one, where it's like you're citing your sources as you go. So you'll get like picture sources. And also, I think oftentimes in WAP or AP World or APUSH or whatever history classes you're in, they'll encourage you to call it source A, source B, source D, source E. My teacher, and I think many teachers who teach synthesis encourage you not to do that. So instead, you'll cite them by their name and credibility. So Joshua Winchell of the U.S. Fish and Wildfire Service demonstrates in his photograph of wind farms, or Julia Layton of How Stuff Works finds in 2006, yada, yada. So like citing your sources specifically is what you would want to do instead. And also, I don't know what other, also like, I feel like in the DBQ, it's really, really focused on the documents, right? Because you're constantly using source A, source B, source C, source D. But on AP Lang, they actually want you to see like sort of like, it's called a synthesis essay. So they want you to incorporate some evidence into your own analysis. So I think AP English actually encourages you to do a lot more of your own analysis, because you have to use some like outside evidence, and you also have to like quote directly from the source. So you'll say, Julia Layton of How Stuff Works mentions that a typical large wind turbine can generate up to 1.8 megawatts of electricity, and you'll like put that in quotes, and then maybe you'll paraphrase a portion, and you'll oftentimes have to use like, so for the argument essay, I don't know if you heard me when I said that like we have to do that refutation. You sometimes like, basically what I did for synthesis is I would go through all A through F, and I would write the sources that are pro something or anti something, or in this case like these factors and these factors, and I would use a source as a rebuttal or a counter argument. So I'd see like the Brown evidence concedes this and this and this. In response, I would argue. So sometimes you have to argue against sources, and so that's a different thing that you will be doing in the synthesis essay. But I feel like that incorporation of documents is what makes the DBQ very similar to the AP Lang synthesis essay. Does that answer your question? I hope it does. I'll wait about like 2 more minutes or so, and then we'll call it a day for the stream. And also, I actually have something to say. In 45 minutes exactly, at 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 Central, 5:30 Pacific, I and Fatima Raja from the AP US government team will actually be hosting a current events stream. And I think it's actually really fun because in one part, of the argument essay, especially in your body paragraphs, you need to be citing evidence to prove your point. So like when I talked about politics being overrated, I mentioned some current events, like the fact that the Senate failed to pass bills because of partisan gridlock. So I highly encourage you, if you have the time, our streams are usually about 30 to 40 minutes or so for current events. Every Monday at 8:30 Eastern, you can tune into our streams. I will be there every other week on Mondays, and we'll just cover some current events that have happened in terms of impeachment. We talk about domestic events, and we talk about events that have happened, like, I guess, in our world, in addition to mentioning what's going on with the 2020 election. So overall, I think that current event stream will really help you out with, I guess, learning more about what's happening in our world today, which just makes you makes you a more educated person overall, but it also helps you out on the AP exam, especially for English language, because if you have the toolbox of different current events, I think it really makes your argument essay really, really easy. So yeah, I'll need the details here. I'll actually post the link to our current events stream down below. Okay, so I think we're done for today. That was a great stream. Thank you all so much for asking questions, making it as cooperative as possible. We'll be doing these every single Monday, and we're always going to do like a Q&A at the end because we want to help you out with what you're learning in AP English. We really want to supplement the curriculum. Thank you all so much for showing up, and have a great rest of your Monday.